What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the channel. Stillen TruPower Stage 2 cold air intake, 2020 Toyota Tundra Platinum. We're going to get this installed and see if it lives up to the hype. Let me start by just giving you a rundown of what we get with the package. Obviously, you get the new intake box with the cover. You get the radiator shroud. You get the tubing. I believe they call this their intake tubing, or I'm sorry, the inlet tubing. This goes from the radiator shroud to the front of the box. Then you have your intake tube that's going to connect your MAF sensor and a couple other hoses. You have a couple of couplers, some hardware, your filter, of course. I went with the oiled option. They do offer a dry option as well, just a personal preference. Some hose clamps for the couplers, some hardware, and then of course the instructions. So it doesn't seem like it's too bad of an install, so let's get up underneath the hood and get it started. First thing we're going to do is pop off the engine cover. That just lifts right up, and we'll set this out of the way. Next step is to remove the MAF sensor, the clip right there. Just slide that out of the way, and then you're going to want to disconnect these two hoses right here, and they're just held on by a couple of clamps. Next step is to loosen the hose clamp that connects the intake tube to the throttle body. I'm using a 10mm socket. Next, undo the two clips that are holding the box cover in place. And you can now remove the top cover along with the intake hose, or intake tubing I should say. Just be careful because your MAF line is still connected right here until we disconnect that part there. So this should just slide off just like that, and then we'll disconnect the MAF line right here. It's held on by a clip in the back there. As you can see, it's just a single clamp or a pop pin right there that holds the MAF line to the cover of the original OEM intake. So once you have the MAF line out of the way, the filter will just pop out just like that, and all we're left with is the bottom of the box, which is only held in by 10mm bolts. So there's one right down here and one on the opposite caddy corner right back down in there. You can't miss them. So just go ahead and loosen up those 10mm bolts, and we'll remove this bottom cover. Okay, so once you have those two 10mm bolts, one here and one on the back, loosened, the bottom of the box is just going to slide out just like this, and that's what you're going to be left with. Next thing you're going to want to do is we need to remove the 3 factory grommets. There's one right here that's next to the inlet vent that goes in the fender. So there's one right here that's literally just get your finger up underneath it and just pop it off like so. And then I'm going to set that aside for a second. And then the two 10mm bolts that were holding the bottom part of the box in place, they're actually in grommets themselves. All you have to do is grab the screw and just pull straight up, and that's going to come out of the grommet. You don't need these screws. Just going to set those aside for now, but then you take the grommets out of the box, and that's what you're left with right there. So I'm going to do that for the other 10mm bolt on the other side as well, because we're going to have to put these grommets into the new Stillen box. So again, you can see that's what the screw looks like. Just slides right out of the grommet, and then you just take the grommet out of the factory box. So now we have 3 grommets that we're going to go install on the new Stillen box. Now that we have these 3 grommets off the factory box, you're going to take the bigger of the 3, and looking at the Stillen box, you're going to see kind of a nipple right here next to the intake right there. You're going to take the skinny end and push it on to the new Stillen box so it looks just like that. And then the other two grommets, when you look in the Stillen box, you're going to see two holes right here. Hopefully you're seeing this right here and up here in the corner. You can't miss them. So you're going to put these two other grommets in those holes. In order to do that, you're just going to kind of squeeze them in there so that they sit with the groove in the Stillen box. You really can't mess this part up, to be honest with you. You'll know exactly what you're doing when you look at it. So that's how the grommets are going to look from the inside, and then that's how it's going to look on the outside. So you can see there's a groove in the middle of the grommet that's going to sit, that's going to kind of keep it in place on the new Stillen box. So I'm going to go ahead and put this other one in this other spot here. So once you have both grommets in place, go ahead and take the factory screws that we removed, and you're going to push these back down into the grommets from the inside of the box out. So you're just going to take them, pop them right back down in, just like they were in the factory box. It's the second one. So once you have the screws in place, this is what you're going to be left with. Next step is to remove the MAF sensor from the factory intake. So that's this piece right here. There's only two Phillips head screws, one here, one there. And just be careful with this. Go ahead and remove those screws, and it's going to slide out. And that's what you're left with right there. That's the MAF sensor. Once you have the MAF sensor removed from the factory piece, you're going to take the TruPower Stillen intake tube, and you can't miss it. There's a groove right here that you're going to slide. When you're looking at it in this orientation, you're going to slide the MAF sensor into that spot there. And then you are not going to use the factory screws. Stillen sends you their 2.5 millimeter Allen screws. So go ahead and secure the MAF sensor with those two new provided screws. Next step is to remove the grill. In order to do that, there's two push pins, or pop pins, pop clips, whatever you want to call them, one on each end. Just take a little screwdriver or a pry tool, pop those out of there. And then there's four 10 millimeter bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4, that we have to go ahead and remove. If you have an 1819 or 2020 with the TSS safety system, just remove this little panel here and unplug the harness that's right underneath it for the TSS safety system. And I also actually have to unplug, I have a front facing camera that I also have to unplug as well, that's connected to the grill. So once you do that, what you want to do is, there's a little bit of a lip here, pop the grill up and over that little bit of a lip, and then basically what you do, I'm going to have to disconnect my camera, but you're just going to grab the grill top and bottom and pull straight out. It's only held in by pop clips at that point. I do have another video showing how to do this in a little bit more depth, but that's basically it. You just have to pull it out over that lip there, grab each side, and pop it out of the pop clip. So I'm going to go ahead and get my camera disconnected here, and I'll get the grill removed. Now we want to remove the factory radiator shroud, which is this piece right here. It's only held in by 6 pop clips, 3 right there, 3 right there. So just take your little screwdriver and pop those out of there. Save these clips because we are going to use them to install the Stillen radiator shroud cover. Then we're going to take the new Stillen radiator shroud and install it right in the factory place and reuse those 6 push pins once we get it lined up to keep it intact. Once we have the radiator piece in place, you're now going to take the box, the new Stillen box, and basically place it in the exact same spot that the factory Toyota box was at. So I'm just going to have to work around my wiring that I have here from my rock lights. And what we're going to do, there is 2 holes in the truck. You kind of just want to, you obviously can't see them, so you want to just feel around until you get the screw started. But you do not want to tighten these screws down. You don't want to tighten these 2 screws down at this point. You want to leave them loose to give yourself a little play until we get the other tubing, the other tubes lined up. All right, guys, I'm not even going to lie to you. That part is a pain in the butt to get this secured down because you cannot see the 2 holes that you're trying to screw into. So you're basically going at it blind, moving the box around a little bit until you feel the screw kind of pop down into the hole and then trying to tighten it before it moves on you. So thankfully I was able to get them 2 started, but again, do not tighten them all the way down just yet. All right, now we want to take the inlet tubing right here. Take the smaller of the 2 couplers. I already have it slid over the inlet side, and then the 2 smaller hose clamps, and just attach it like that. So you can see the skinnier part on the inlet is the part that's going to go on top. So you're going to take this part, slide it down here alongside the headlight assembly, so it comes out and meets the opening in that radiator shroud. So just get it all lined up. And then as you can see, which maybe the windshield washers and fluids in the way, but the other end of this coupler is going to line up perfectly with this part of the box. So just go ahead and make those connections. Make sure everything is lined up in the front with the radiator shroud. Push this inlet tubing back onto the box assembly. Make sure it's on there nice and tight. And then out here in the front, again, just make sure the inlet tubing is lined up with the opening in the radiator shroud out in the front. So, all right, so now that that's done, you want to just make sure both ends are nice and secure on the box end and the inlet tubing end. Once that's done, then you can go ahead and take these 2 hose clamps, put 1 on each end. So you're going to secure the coupler to the box and to the inlet tube itself. And that's an 8mm socket, just so you know. You could also use a flathead screwdriver, of course, but I feel like these are easier to use as socket. So go ahead and tighten those down. Next step is to take the intake tube, the bigger of the 2 couplers, slide the coupler on the end, and then we're just going to install the bigger end into the box, and then the other end of the coupler onto, well, actually, I'm sorry, before we do that, the other 2 hose clamps need to go around the coupler. All right, so once you have the hose clamps and this end of the coupler secured, slide the bigger end of the intake tube into the box, and then the other side of the coupler. And this is again why you don't want to tighten those other 2 screws down just yet that are inside the box, because as you can see, you need a little bit of play in order to get this installed properly. All right, so once you have this in position, everything is fitting nice, and make sure this coupler is over the throttle body, even down below underneath, and it's fully onto the intake tube. Once you have that done, just go ahead and take the two hose clamps, position one on each end. One, just make sure, little tip, make sure it's over the intake tube, so when you're tightening it down, like I can feel the edge of the intake tube is right there, so my hose clamp is well over that to make sure it holds nice and secure. Same thing on the other end, you just want to make sure this hose clamp is slid all the way down towards the throttle body, just to make sure when you tighten it, it holds on there. 8mm socket, go ahead and tighten these down. Once you have the two hose clamps connected here and tightened down, you want to make sure they're good and secure. You don't have to go crazy, but make sure they're nice and tight so there's no play in that whatsoever. One piece that I should have installed, which in the instructions it actually says this little white piece, it says that it does come installed. Mine did not. So when you're looking at the back of the intake tube, you have the MAF sensor right here. The middle hose, which that's where this piece is going to go. It comes, there's a piece of tubing and then an adapter. You just want to push the piece of tubing there's a halfway mark. Just push the piece of tubing that comes in your kit halfway up. The other half of this is going to go into the middle hose that we disconnected. So you just want to push that on there nice and tight. And I'll get back to that in a second, but going back to this white piece, the final slot over here is a threaded slot. This is actually supposed to be threaded in there. Again, Stillen says that it comes installed. Mine did not. Just in case yours doesn't, you might want to do this before you actually put the intake tube in. And to tighten it down, it's a 14mm, or actually a 9/16 works as well. Both of them fitted. It's plastic, so there's a little bit of play in it. But you just want to go ahead and install that white plastic piece into the threaded slot on the intake tube. Alright, so now that we have that white plastic piece threaded in there, you can come back to the middle tubing, connect it to the fatter of the two tubings that you disconnected originally, and again, just slide it on there nice and tight. You're going to kind of twist as you slide it on. Make sure it's in there nice and secure. I can't quite get mine on there all the way, but that's well on there. It's not going to go anywhere. Connect this to the middle part on the intake tube. Just slides right on. Take the smaller hose that we disconnected originally and attach it to that white plastic piece that we threaded in. Make sure that's on there nice and tight. Take the MAF sensor, plug that back in. Make sure all three connections are nice and secure. And we can move on to tightening those two bolts on the inside of the box. Okay, the only step left to do on the intake itself is install the filter. And the rim on the filter goes around the edge of the intake tube. Now it's kind of a tight fit, so just work it down in there. Make sure it's around down on the bottom. And there you go. So again, feel down around the bottom, make sure it's all secure. Sorry, I just bumped the camera. Once you have it on there, again, over the lip of the intake tube, you could then tighten down this hose clamp, which is also an 8mm, or you could use the flathead screwdriver. Alright guys, once you have that on there secure, we're just going to grab the top of the box, screw it in place. You can't miss it. There's 8 screws on the top that's going to secure that, and then we'll pop the grill back on and we'll fire it up, see how it sounds. Just so you guys know, these are 3mm Allen screws, so you'll want to use a 3mm Allen wrench. And they are small, so just be careful you don't drop them, because they don't send you any extra. forget to put your engine cover back on. These two areas in the back of the cover sit on the roller in the back, what looks like a roller. So just put them in place, and then there's only 2 pins that it's going to rest down on. Just put it down and push down, and you'll actually feel the engine cover pop into place. Lastly, we're just going to reinstall the grill. So just line up the tabs on the grill with the slots that they go into. I like to just start out by lining up one side instead of trying to worry about both sides at once. So just line that up like that, pop it in like that, over to the other side. Same thing, just pop it in. There we go. Once you have it lined up, it'll just fall into place. Push all along the bottom. There are push pins that go across the bottom there. And then take the back lip and just put it back up over where it sits so it's nice and secure. Then take your 2 push pins, pop those back into place, tighten down your 4 10mm bolts. You're good to go. Do not forget to reconnect your TSS safety system if you have it. Alright guys, that concludes the installation of the Stillen TruPower Stage 2 cold air intake on my 2020 Tundra Platinum. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. I'm absolutely loving the kit. It just gives it a little bit of extra sound paired with my new exhaust that I just installed a few days ago, so I couldn't be happier. Install was super easy, as you saw. The hardest part about the entire process was lining up that new box, you know, just because you can't see where you're screwing those 2 screws into. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward, not bad at all. Anybody can do this install, so hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, leave them down below, and we'll get back at you. So as always, I appreciate you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Take care.